I felt the need for me to somehow or another use humanity to get people to become aware of how people suffered. That was what drove me into it, to expose something to the public that I felt was being hidden.
It's kind of insane all the things Gordon Parks did in his life. He was a poet, a novelist, a jazz pianist, a classical composer. He co-founded Essence magazine and served as its editorial director for its first 3 years. In 1969, he became the first black director of a major Hollywood movie called The Learning Tree, which was based on a semi-autobiographical book that he wrote and for which he adapted the screenplay and composed the score. He also directed Shaft, a huge commercial hit that helped to spawn the blaxploitation genre and helped to save MGM and the larger studio system from bankruptcy. All that would be enough for 10 lives, but it leaves out Parks's greatest contribution to American art in the 20th century, his photography.
One day, I saw a newsreel of the bombing of the American gunship called the Panay. Right after that, the intercom boomed, "Here's Norman Alley, the man who shot this wonderful image." I never forgot that. And when I got to Seattle, Washington, I had about $12.50, and I went right into a pawn shop and bought myself a camera.
At 25, Parks picked up a Voigtlander Brilliant, his first camera, and taught himself how to take photos with it. 3 years later, he was an official photographer for the Town and Country department store in St. Paul, Minnesota. He worked for local newspapers and began to document life on the south side of Chicago, for which he won the Rosenwald Fellowship. All that attention landed him a job at the Farm Security Administration, a New Deal government project that involved documentary support for government aid. In the FSA, Parks took what would become his most famous picture.
She told me her name was Ella Watson, and I asked her if I could photograph her. I had really thought of Grant Wood's picture of the American Gothic. I put a broom in one hand and a mop in the other, and told her to look directly into the camera.
American Gothic shows that Parks knew the power of iconography, how juxtapositions and comparisons can make a statement that sticks in the mind. In fact, the head of the FSA, Roy Stryker, felt that the statement of American Gothic may have been too strong.
He said, "Well, you're getting the idea, but you're going to get us all fired." He said, "This is a government agency, and that picture is an indictment against America."
Parks learned that the camera could be a powerful tool. It forced people to see the cruelties in their own society, which is important when so often what allows those cruelties to persist is people's determination not to see them. The bluntness of American Gothic is the reason for its power, but in his autobiography, Parks called the photo unsubtle. As he became a more experienced photographer, he learned how to capture a more nuanced vision of the America he saw without losing any of American Gothic's moral force. In 1948, Parks shot the photo essay that landed him a position at Life magazine as their first ever black staff photographer. The essay followed Red Jackson, a 17-year-old leader of a Harlem gang called the Midtowners. The lead photo features Red hiding out in an abandoned building, trapped there by a rival gang on the street below. It's a stark image, highly dramatic in its chiaroscuro lighting. Red is shrouded in darkness, peering through a window of shattered glass. You can feel his isolation. Behind him is shadow, in front of him the world, but the light is no safer for Red than the darkness. In both directions, he's in danger of disappearing. A few photos later, we learn that Red was coming from the funeral of a buddy, a 15-year-old named Maurice, who the police found on a Harlem sidewalk and decided had died accidentally. As Red and his friends leave the chapel, they get ambushed and forced into that abandoned building. They escape unharmed, but the following night, the two gangs brawl. Harlem Gang Leader shows the stressful and exhausting reality for Harlem youth in the late 40s. But Parks isn't documenting that world like some kind of anthropologist. His portrait of Harlem is an intimate one, earned by spending time with Red and his community. You get the full effect of this intimacy when you look at the photos that Life chose not to include in the essay. Red's life is more than just violence. These are kids, trying to be kids, but forced to navigate circumstances they can't control and don't deserve.
I pointed my camera at people mostly who needed someone to say something for them, and who couldn't speak for themselves.
In 1956, Parks went to Alabama to document segregation in the South. The pictures he captured there are some of his most iconic and most moving. Lovecraft Country on HBO paid homage to a few in its season premiere, and that speaks to their enduring power. A more mature photographer at this point, Parks is able to record the monstrousness of racism in quotidian reality, in moments of quiet dignity by people who refuse to be dehumanized, even as forces that deny their dignity and their humanity literally hang over their heads. In so many of Parks's photographs, his lens has a profound empathy, a friendliness. You can't help but to identify with his subjects, and once you do that, you're implicated. His pictures, in their gentleness, become persuasive acts of protest, showing many in America what they had never seen, or what they had seen, but refused to acknowledge. For this reason and more, they're magnificent and important works of art from an artist who has no shortage of them.